Welcome in. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so thrilled that you're spending an hour of your day with us at the GAI webinar series. We're going to give our friends and colleagues some time to join us, and we look forward to sharing some really cool information with you today. It's a little bit of a different angle on opportunity in the food and ag space. Today, we're going to be focusing in on precision diagnostics for food allergies and what that could mean for the industry as a whole. We're very excited to have with us Jim Garner, who's the CEO of AllerGenis. He's got 30 years of experience in the diagnostic space, so he is very well versed in what we're going to be talking about today, and I think his company is doing some truly exciting things in the space. So we look forward to hearing. Please, everyone, I know that this is going to be a personal topic for a lot of you. We all know someone who deals with food allergies. So I want you to be free and open with your questions. So hopefully we'll get into a nice dialogue after the presentation. So please put any questions you have throughout into the Q&A chat box, and I'll come back in at the end and address those. Jim, thank you so much. We've had a good time learning about what you're doing, and I've enjoyed learning from you on multiple calls about this industry and just what the massive opportunity is for correcting some of the flaws within the diagnostic space. So I'm looking forward to your presentation and to our discussion, and thank you so much for being with us at GAI.
Kate, thanks for inviting me. Thank you for preparing the webinar. And you're right, there's a huge impact to be made in terms of helping people deal with living with a food allergy diagnosis. And I definitely want to personalize it. And before I get to the next slide, I'd like for everybody who's logged in today to think about the last time they had a family gathering around a meal, or a child's birthday party, the last time you were actually able to host a birthday party. I want you to recall that experience and realize that it looks like 14 people logged on. There's at least 2 people that were impacted in this audience, and other listeners that are going to join on the recorded session. It's 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 10 Americans are impacted by a diagnosis of a food allergy. But it's even more impactful from just those individuals with the diagnosis. It infects their families, extended and far as well. So I'm going to really suggest to you that this impact on the ag and food business is pretty dramatic in terms of the way these consumers are impacted. So 1 in 4 Americans do not buy products which contain 9 culprits causing allergic reactions: peanut, milk, egg, tree nuts, shellfish, finfish, sesame, wheat, and soy. 85 million Americans have altered their diets because of a food allergy diagnosis. And I know when I heard that number for the first time, I said, how could that be? How could it be, if 30 million Americans have a diagnosis, how could it be 85 million Americans alter their diet? And you've all heard of peanut-free schools. Well, the reason that school is peanut-free, I'll guarantee you the kid's home is also peanut-free. And if that family is like my family, my kids spend a lot of time with their grandparents. The grandparents' home is also peanut-free or nut-free. So thinking about your Thanksgiving meal or your Christmas meal, or thinking about that birthday party, when there's a food allergy present, the host takes great care to ensure that the food is allergy friendly for the whole family. And birthday parties are now, it's prevalent. Birthday parties are allergy friendly. So it's true, 1 in 4 Americans are buying food in a way which is influenced by a food allergy diagnosis. The problem that we're addressing is that over half of those individuals have been overdiagnosed. The tools that are present today are so poor that there's really an inability to get an accurate and precise diagnosis. So what happens is 1 in 4 Americans are altering their diet, and they don't need to. And the impact on the industry, you know very well, from farmers to restaurants, the food industry has had to respond and had to react to the impact on consumers. And research shows that consumers are looking at labels, they trust brand, and they also appreciate and are loyal to the manufacturers who are producing food allergy-friendly foods in a safe but also an affordable way. So our company believes that individuals and families that are living with food allergies should feel safe, in control, and have the same quality of life as the rest of the community. We know from further research that food allergy has a $25 billion impact on the healthcare community, from out-of-pocket expenses to special diets to emergency room visits to EpiPens. It's a significant indication to deal with. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 30 million Americans diagnosed with a food allergy. 5 million of those are children. These children have highly engaged parents or caregivers. And as I articulated, more than half of the population has been overdiagnosed. And we're introducing a disruptive technology to help solve for that, to help manage the disease as well, to help manage the folks that actually do have a food allergy, as well as identify in a better way individuals that don't have the food allergy. It's a proprietary product. We have an in-market assay today for peanut. Our second peanut test that we're going to talk about today is in final development. We're about to launch that product. And from a commercial standpoint, it's a concentrated market. There's only 3,000 allergists in the United States that treat patients with food allergy. So with a modest commercial effort, we're able to penetrate those offices and get our technology into the hands of the providers as well as the patient. The investment opportunity is $15 million. And with that financing, we're going to continue to capture market share and advance our commercial products and the commercial launch, as well as secure FDA approval for products that would ultimately be marketed directly to consumers. I've said overdiagnosis a couple times, and there's a reason behind the overdiagnosis. And on the far right side, it has to do with test performance. So from left to right, the way a patient is identified as being allergic is they reacted to something. But you'll remember when your kids first started eating solid food, on their little tray in front of them on their baby chair, there was yogurt, there was Cheerios, there was strawberries, there may have been a hot dog, maybe there was some cheese, and perhaps a spoonful of peanut butter. There was a reaction, and the mom, the dad, they don't know exactly what the child reacted to, so the history becomes ambiguous. When there's ambiguous history, allergists do the best they can to pinpoint what caused it. The next step is to do what's called a skin prick test. You perturb the epidermis with an antigen, with the food product that you think caused the allergic reaction, and you gauge to see how big the hive is, if there is one. It's not perfect. The test performance really doesn't add, the current blood test performance doesn't add to this clinical workup. In fact, it was developed 40 years ago with no innovation since then. We're bringing to bear technology that has been perfected in the last 10 to 12 years, and also using the science from the Human Genome Project to pinpoint specific epitopes or specific parts of the immune response that are causing the allergic reaction. And the present technology isn't capable of doing that. So skin prick test leads to inconclusive results. And the only way to diagnose truly if a patient has a food allergy is to give them the peanut or the milk or the egg that you think caused the reaction and gauge for an allergic reaction. If one happens, you have to stop it with epinephrine or with adrenaline. Because of the risk and the time-consuming nature of it, oral food challenges are avoided. In fact, we know from primary market research and talking to clinicians, the only time they do an oral food challenge is to confirm their bias that the child is not allergic. So what happens, these children that don't get an oral food challenge, it's not confirmed if they do or if they don't. And if they do have a food challenge, there's a food allergy. If they don't have the food challenge, there's no way to know how much peanut they actually react to or how much milk product they actually react to. They just avoid peanut altogether, even though they might be able to eat 10 peanuts before they react. The food challenge is an important part of the workup, and it's not being done. And with the advent of immunotherapies, you may have read last year, there was a immunotherapy approved by the FDA for peanut allergy. It's in the marketplace, but there's no accurate way to identify the patients that are likely going to respond from the therapy. And there's no way to understand if they are responding without doing an oral food challenge until the advent of our products. We think about our product portfolio across a spectrum of the disease or the continuum of disease, from diagnosis, understanding the allergic status, to sensitivity, what I just described. How many peanuts can you eat before you actually have an allergic reaction? With milk and egg, children outgrow those allergies by about age 8, 80% of the time, but you don't know which kids are going to outgrow without doing this challenge repeatedly. So they end up avoiding milk or egg. Same with form. You can be allergic to baked or raw. So you might be allergic to egg, but you can tolerate a muffin. That's only understood by doing a food challenge. And then finally, again, the response to therapy. The only way to know if these therapies are impactful is to try to eat the food. So our blood tests are replacing this clinical procedure, but also providing the information that they should be getting if they were to do that procedure. We also think about leveraging data analytics. So I talked about the current tool was developed 40 years ago and no innovation. And because of the poor nature of its results, the data that comes from it's not usable. Our data, our results, like the Human Genome Project, can be put into a database so that we can learn as a community about the differences in peanut allergy and the differences in milk allergy, stratifying the patient population. Today, if your daughter is allergic to egg, she's treated exactly the same way as my son who's allergic to egg. But my wife and your daughter's mother know they're not the same, but they're all treated identically. That doesn't happen anymore in oncology. It's because there's a lack of information, and our database is going to be the first of its kind around harnessing the information that comes from all of the input around the patient. And just think about the ability for a food manufacturer to query this database to understand the endotype or the phenotype of the patients that react to peanut at a very low level and react to and are able to tolerate a high amount of peanut. We're very excited about our progress. We have a seasoned team in place that are leaders and experts in scaling companies and introducing novel diagnostics. We also have a very engaged board, including Dr. Hugh Sampson. He's the most cited researcher in food allergy therapeutics as well as diagnostics. He's the scientific researcher behind our product, and he's quite engaged not only with our company, but in the community. And he's really afforded us a lot of great insights into what we're doing. So the evolution of diagnostic testing, I've talked about, there's not been any evolution, no innovation until now. So what we're bringing to bear is really 21st century precision diagnostics to help better manage the indication. There are problems with the tools that are used in play today. Again, the gold standard, the OFC, is avoided. So the information is not being shared. What we're really trying to address is the number of false positives that occur, as well as identifying the patients who have a true allergy so that they can be better managed. And we really want to mitigate the expense associated with living with a food allergy. If you don't have it, you don't need to be on the special diets. You don't need the EpiPens. There's significant cost associated with these false positives. And again, there's risk associated with the way it's being diagnosed or avoiding being diagnosed. You actually ingest peanut and you think you're allergic to it and you gauge for a reaction. We're replicating that physiological response in a tube of blood instead of in the patient. So we're answering the same clinical questions that the parents want to know and the provider want to know. What's the allergic status? How allergic are they? Are they going to outgrow milk? Are they going to respond to the new peanut immunotherapy? And we're now able to answer those questions from a tube of blood. We also have a robust platform that we've already validated from receiving the patient sample, going through a high throughput complex instrument, using machine learning and an algorithm to generate answers to clinical questions. So the testing platform has been validated with the advent of our first product that's in the clinic today, the diagnosis. We don't have to validate the platform again. We just are looking at a different answer to a different clinical question, the reactivity threshold, the same for therapeutic response, and the same for different foods. So our pipeline includes those 9 allergens that are being avoided today. I'm going to talk later about peanut, milk, and egg. They account for 80% of the pediatric encounters in food allergy. So that's our near-term focus, peanut, milk, and egg. Again, we think about our products across the continuum of the disease, from diagnosis to how much can you tolerate or not tolerate, all the way through the response to therapies. And our pipeline is well underway for peanut, milk, and egg, having launched our first product, about to launch our second product. Tree nut, sweet, soy, sesame, shellfish, and finfish are all in development as well. It's a large market. 80% of the pediatric encounters are attributed to peanut, milk, and egg. These 5 million children are avoiding food. They're having emergency room visits. There's tremendous impact on living with a food allergy. And again, we're in a perfect position to help solve some of these dilemmas. And from our business standpoint, when we think about the testing opportunity, it's a vast marketplace. So today there's about 1.5 million testing events done annually for diagnosing inaccurately the condition, and then about 2.5 million testing events a year to clean up that diagnostic process. Allergists call it delabeling. They spend about half of their time in the office seeing the patient again and again and again, year after year, trying to understand if there actually is an allergy present. But once again, they're avoiding the food challenge because of the risk. And we're stepping into that space, represented by the green bar, the greenfield opportunity for replacing the oral food challenge, as well as the amount of testing that's going to be required with the advent of immunoassays. The precision diagnostic is going to be required by caregivers, by providers, and by payers. Insurance companies are going to want to ensure that this $12,000 for 6 months of immunotherapy is being given to a child who's actually allergic to peanut. And then the maintenance therapy, another $6,000 for the rest of the year, is working. Payers are going to ask for evidence of that. And an oral food challenge can't give that evidence. So we're in a unique position to be able to fill this need. Our investment opportunity is going to, again, help us to make sure we're executing against our business plan, to scale commercial operations, to begin generating revenue. And this investment of $15 million gets us to a profitability state. I've talked about our product development. We'll continue to work on those products. It'll help us speed up that development process. And we also are seeking FDA approval of our first product, which is called the laboratory developed test. And that's going to help us be able to market to consumers. And through all this, we'll be able to increase the valuation of the company. We already know and consider our exit will be substantial. And we believe that in 3 to 4 years, we'll be in a position to achieve an attractive exit, either from a strategic industry buyer like Thermo Fisher, that's the market leader of the current products, who are keeping a careful eye on what we're doing, and they have for about the last 15 years of our scientific development. Also, competitors to Thermo Fisher are staying aware of what we're doing. And the therapeutic manufacturers that are coming up with the immunotherapies and the products to treat these patients, also, we're already in collaboration with around our biomarkers. And then finally, a food company, Nestle Health Science, acquired one of these immunotherapy companies called Aimmune. They spent $2.6 billion last fall for this peanut immunotherapy as their first entry into the food allergy space. And we believe that Nestle will be a likely either strategic partner or acquirer of our technology because of the importance it is not only to that immunotherapy, but their future pipeline. We also believe that from our strong financial performance that we could be acquired by a financial buyer. And again, back to the caregiver, it's an ardent, passionate group of parents who take care of their kids with food allergies. And we believe that given the emotional nature of the food allergy and the impact on the family, that it would be a successful IPO and a liquid trade. And we also understand the impact that we could have on your industry. This idea that over half of the people looking at labels and taking their time and consideration about avoiding food that they're not allergic to, we believe that we'll have a very strong impact on the industry and be a significant financial benefit to your companies and your investment. We have some comps here. Thermo Fisher was acquired several years ago by Thermo Fisher acquired Phadia several years ago for 7 times revenue at the time, $3.5 billion, and that's a large global entity today. And I mentioned Nestle Health Science, who's acquired other companies as well, very focused on nutritional products, and we believe that they're going to make a big entry into food allergy as well. So to summarize, we have an in-market product today. We began testing in our clinical laboratory last summer in the midst of COVID. We're about to launch our second product. We know that this second product, the sensitivity test, is going to dramatically increase the use of the diagnostic test as well and change the way peanut allergy is diagnosed in the clinic and managed over time. And our pipeline of milk and egg are rapidly advancing as well. So by this time in 2023, we'll have all three products in the market. We're poised to launch milk and egg next spring or next summer, depending on the speed to which we get this investment. And we know that these tests combined, these three tests combined, are going to change the way food allergy is being managed today. We've also, because of Hugh Sampson's stature and influence in the community, have had great support from the thought leaders globally around food allergy. And we have access not only to their research, but also the cohorts of patients that they've conducted clinical trials on. We have now amassed the largest database, as well as biorepository of blood samples from kids that have undergone oral food challenges. We have the largest one in the world because of our relationships with these researchers. And we're also rapidly advancing in developing what's called a complementary diagnostic for several leading therapeutic companies. And that's a blood test that accompanies the therapeutic to help stratify the patient, to understand which one will respond, which one may not respond. Payers like to see that. Drug companies are attracted to complementary diagnostics because they then can attribute higher value to their products because they can prove they're treating the right patient. And then over time, we're able to help keep the patients on these products because we can prove to the patient that they're working. And also, an unexpected discovery in our research is that we have patented an epitope which has therapeutic implications as well. So there are opportunities to license and collaborate with therapeutic companies in that regard, as well as the complementary diagnostic space. We're raising $15 million to help our proven team commercialize this company. We have a vast and growing addressable market. We have exclusive technology. We have the IP that has formed and will continue to form barrier to entry, as well as scientific know-how. And we know that we're answering significant unmet clinical needs. We've also thought very carefully about this business plan and how to best de-risk it and make sure it's achievable so that we attain that exit that I talked about. And Kate, I'm ready for questions.
All right, well done. I am a native of Georgia, as some of you know, and so I'm coming at you from a peanut field today because I have great interest in the success of the peanut industry, and I think that this is a really exciting moment in terms of what it could mean for the future for a lot of kids and certainly a lot of companies who have to maintain a careful process in terms of cleaning out and being nut-free and making those food product choices for the consumer. So I just have a series of a few questions. And again, anyone listening in, please throw your questions into the chat box. Just like a logistics question, one thing that I didn't really understand is when the blood is taken from the patient, is this process, the testing, something that happens at point of care? Does it go off to a lab like Quest? Does it come back to you for the testing process? Who's actually conducting the test on the blood?
Our long-term vision, Kate, is that it will be point of care. And then secondarily to that, it would be at Quest or LabCorp. Today, the testing is performed in our laboratory outside of Philadelphia. So we're a sole source clinical laboratory. It's the way most novel diagnostics are introduced. We will eventually get to a point where it'll be warranted to sell through Quest or LabCorp. And because of the nature of food allergy, it absolutely needs to be point of care. And it even could be a specimen collection kit at CVS on the shelf right next to the 23andMe kit so that caregivers can get an answer rapidly, answer that helps them understand what to do next, likely go to see an allergist. But we do have that long-term vision that this is something that should be in the hands of consumers so that they have the information they need.
I'm going to circle back around because I have another one on that. But in the meantime, in terms of cost differential between the more traditional methods of testing and what this would look like for a patient now, is there a major gap there?
The current tools offered by Quest and LabCorp, we are priced the same.
Okay.
The oral food challenge, which is avoided, is about 2 times to 3 times as much as the blood panels that are being offered. So an oral food challenge costs anywhere from $1,500 to $2,400 to perform, and our list price for our blood test is $685, which is the same price that Quest charges for the peanut panel.
Got it. Perfect. So back to the consumer product that's down the pipeline. You had mentioned to me one time that there were some diagnostic kits that were being sold that were not FDA approved, and it sounds like it's your vision and plan to secure that approval. How can you sort of weed out those, I don't want to call them bad actors, I'm not saying that they are, but it sounds like they're part of the problem in this overdiagnosis, that people can maybe become alarmed that they can go out and get maybe a positive result on a test that hasn't been FDA approved. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of that approval and why it's part of your plan?
Yes, it's an important point, and FDA is part of that, but the tests that are currently being offered to adults through Everlywell or Let's Get Checked Now, those tests are similar in nature to what we're evaluating. However, they're not precise enough to diagnose a food allergy. So what they can claim, and the FDA doesn't prevent them from claiming, the ability to identify a food intolerance. An intolerance means that your tummy might hurt if you ingest the food, but you're not at risk for anaphylactic shock. It's not fatal to ingest that food. The problem with food intolerance testing is that these panels come back with dozens of positive tests, and you're suggested to eliminate any of those positives from your diet and slowly introduce them one at a time to understand what you end up having to avoid. It's called elimination diets. So for the adult population, it's quite cumbersome. It's not helpful, and you're only eliminating foods that you're intolerant to. Again, maybe an upset tummy or maybe some sensitivity in your mouth, but not a food allergy. It's not a food that you absolutely have to avoid because you might have anaphylactic shock. For children, those tests aren't marketed. What our vision would be is to go through now the advent of telemedicine and telehealth. We would work closely with allergists to help the mom understand, yes, it's time to do the AllerGenis test. And once I get the results back, we'll talk again. But you can go to CVS and get the kit. I'll get the results day after tomorrow, and I'll give you a call. For children, it's a much different proposition, right? Because as adults, we can decide for ourselves if I want to submit my blood and if I want to go through this elimination diet. But for children, our company is very cognizant of approaching it through providers. But we definitely have a consumer orientation. So we partner with the food allergy mom support groups. We're partnering with industry. We're very cognizant about the importance of customer awareness or consumer awareness around ensuring that they're asking the right questions so that they can get access to technology like ours. And I'll make one more point about the sensitivity test in the oral food challenge. When a child goes through an oral food challenge, it's almost always because the allergist thinks that they will not react. If the child does by chance react, the allergist doesn't reveal how much peanut or how much milk was ingested before the reaction occurred. They don't tell them, well, you actually ate 3 peanuts before you reacted, which means you can eat a product that's labeled with trace peanut. The allergist doesn't take that risk. They tell the patient and the caregiver, your child must avoid peanut at all costs. When a child is taken into an oral food challenge and they think the child is going to react, it's only to get into a clinical trial. So this diagnostic process, this diagnostic tool isn't being used the way you would think it would be used. If I was allergic to shrimp, I would want to know, okay, Can I have a couple? Or do I react as soon as it touches my lips? Maybe I can have a whole shrimp cocktail. But that, as an adult, I would be asked somebody to push me to that point. Allergists avoid pushing patients to reaction unless it's to get into a clinical trial. Our blood test will give the allergist the information they need to be able to tell the patient how to manage living with this allergy, how to read food labels, how to understand, you know what, you can go to a Thai restaurant and your little sister can have pad Thai. Don't you have pad Thai, but it's okay to sit next to somebody that's eating it. Today, a family that has a child with a peanut allergy, they don't go to Thai restaurants because they've been told you have to avoid peanuts. The whole family can't go to a Thai restaurant.
Yeah. So that I latched on to part of the presentation that I hadn't really understood before, and the data analytics tool. So I'm wondering if we can delve into that just a little bit. Is that
Sure.
something that would be like a subscription model for food companies? Will they be able to use these sensitivity levels to maybe educate and inform their labeling processes? What is it? What do you see the outlook for that tool to be?
We haven't figured out yet, Kate, how to monetize it or how to have subscribers, but we have contemplated how to partner with industry, how to partner with therapeutic manufacturers, how to partner with support groups, how to give access to the individual. So creating a database around endotype or phenotype. So thinking about the individual patient. All right, so I have a peanut Verimap sensitivity level of 443. I want to go into the database and I want to see the other 500 12-year-old boys that have that same sensitivity level. What's their life like? Can they go to an ice cream shop? And if I'm a provider, all right, I have this young girl at 143 milligrams of milk, and she's thinking about going on immunotherapy. Of all of the patients in this database that are being treated with immunotherapy for milk at this level, how did they respond? What was their outcome associated with this treatment? For researchers, we think about, all right, we want to understand where best to target the next therapy. Should it be only for the very, very sensitive kids? Because that's where all the emergency room visits are happening. Or should it be across the whole spectrum? For food manufacturers, absolutely. Thinking about labeling. How much protein do we have to be aware of before we need to put it on a label? And instead of getting down to the minute particle, which doesn't impact anybody, does our food safety testing have to be as sensitive as the food safety testing companies are selling us? Because if nobody reacts at below 10 milligrams of peanut, then we don't need to worry about 10 milligrams of peanut. But the food safety products today are so sensitive that they're detecting far less than 10 milligrams of peanut, which is less than 0.1% of the population reacts to that level of peanut. So a database like that will help inform all the constituents around food allergy. It's already happening in oncology.
Very cool. Very cool. Jonathan would like to know about the 15 million that you're seeking. Do you have a rough breakdown of how you plan to use that capital?
Yes, it's about 60% to 65% commercial. R&D is the bulk of the remaining, and it's about 10% G&A. It's absolutely to be used to scale commercial operations, and we want to continue to develop these products to go immediately into the clinic.
Great. And can you also elaborate on the revenue projections for the next few years and when you think that you'll be profitable?
Yes, we project profitability in 2023, 2024, depending on the timing of the investment. And by the end of 2025, we see revenues approaching 200 million. And that includes the collaborations with pharmaceutical partners in terms of developing biomarker assays for their therapeutics, for their drugs, as well as the pull-through testing that comes from that. We've already generated revenue from one of those therapeutic companies, and we've been written into a phase 3 trial for a large global therapeutic manufacturer. That trial begins enrollment in October, and we would see revenue generation from that development program next year and pull through testing in the next 4 to 5 years in the clinic.
Perfect. And so I just want to go back to something that you mentioned, because it's boggling my mind a little bit about the fact that there's been no progress in this space for decades. And it seems like it's something that does touch so many of us. And it is something that is so important and could change so many lives if there was a way to, take out the social anxiety aspect, or, get to a point where it's not so all encompassing. Is it just wild lack of investment, underinvestment? I mean, is the government doing anything to work on this? Why do you think it's been so long without progress?
Part of it is the nature of the biology and the recent revelations around what causes the immune response to have this reaction. And it's the scientific discoveries from UC Hampton's research lab that identified individual epitopes, individual peptides that trigger their immune response. And it hadn't been understood until probably 12 or 15 years ago. And at that time, there were no diagnostic tools that were precise enough to replicate the signals. They weren't precise enough to be able to detect these peptides. And in the last 10 years, the instrument we use has advanced by the use of lasers and algorithms and machine learning. We're now able to precisely measure this antibody-antigen reaction at a very minute level, which technology has not supported before the last 10 years. We also know from our experience with Dr. Sampson and our interactions with Thermo Fisher, Phadia tried to put these peptides on their instrumentation, and they couldn't make it work. Their instrumentation wasn't capable of this detection, and they stopped trying. So Dr. Sampson took the effort back away from Thermo Fisher Phadia, took it into his research lab, and figured it out. And our company partnered with Dr. Sampson to be able to put it into the assay formulation we have today that can actually also be commercialized. So another big part of research to clinic includes it may work in a chemistry experiment, it may work in a research lab, but it takes 12 days to get it to work, and it only works 60% of the time. When you commercialize a product for use in the clinic, it can only take a few hours, and it has to work every time. You can't have a diagnostic test ordered by a physician that fails 6 times out of 10. It has to be able to produce a result every time. And we have been able to successfully get from the research to the clinic through that process. And Thermo stopped innovating in 1989 on their current product and introduced a derivative in 2008, but it's really just a subtype of the same test. It doesn't get anywhere near the resolution to be able to predict the outcome of the oral food challenge. So their test has a positive, but it doesn't correlate to reacting or not reacting to an oral food challenge. So you could have a 3 and need EpiPens because you reacted to peanut. You could have a 14 and not react in the oral food challenge. There's no stratification of the results. And ours is precise. If our blood test is positive, you have a 95% likelihood of reacting to peanut in a food challenge. Our second test is telling you how much peanut do you react to without doing the oral food challenge. It's taken this long to be able to get that kind of precision in the clinic.
Wow, it's just amazing. We've got another questions, and I think it just goes back to the database, which just seems like such a game-changing tool. As a mom, the nut allergy situation is really tricky in schools. Is it possible that the schools will be able to buy into this database or to utilize this database so that there's an understanding of what keep kids safe in each school district or each school. I mean, that probably speaks to liability and again, the social anxiety piece of it. So I don't know if it sounds like you would be welcoming a lot of different stakeholders.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I'm also, it's a fascinating topic, and I talk about food allergy every day. So we'll go way beyond the webinar time. You never hear of a milk-free school. Milk is the most prevalent allergy in kids.
Wow, just that right there is. Go ahead.
Why do we have nut-free schools if peanut is the second most prevalent allergy? Peanut is not hazelnut, it's not almond, it's not pistachio. If you're allergic to peanut, doesn't mean you're allergic to every tree nut. A peanut is behind you, right? It's not a tree. I'm going to butcher this word. It's a legume.
It is. You would do
if you're
very well.
allergic to peanut, it doesn't mean you're allergic to walnuts. So you can have Mrs. Tate's cookies, chocolate chip and walnut. You can have that. But a person who is peanut allergic thinks they can't have a Mrs. Tate cookie with walnut. So the question around school safety, I'm on the board of an organization called Red Sneakers for Oakley. It's all around awareness. It's all around education. So my kid's school says it's nut free. It's pre-K 3 through 8th grade. There's one kid with a peanut allergy. Why is the whole school nut free? It's around awareness, and it's around education. It's around understanding. You don't have to shut down the whole school because of COVID, and you don't have to shut down the whole school because of peanut. So it's very important to have everybody in the constituency. It's everybody in the school has to understand, all right, my daughter does have a peanut allergy. Here's what we do. Here's what we don't do. She doesn't have to sit at a peanut-free table, but don't throw peanuts at her either. So it's a very important community education process and effort. So to the extent the database can help, absolutely. To the extent we can, through patient education and awareness and working with the advocacy groups, we're already doing that. So absolutely, we want to address your listener's question.
Great. I wonder, is this a largely American issue?
No,
I would
it's
love
global.
to hear about sort of a demographic breakdown of the problem.
It's about the same in European countries. It's worse in Australia per capita. 8% of Chinese pediatric patients have some form of food allergy. 8% of that number, it's a global problem. And it's not a epidemic, it's not a pandemic. We all know what a pandemic means now. It's not an epidemic. Food allergies are increasing, but it's because of the avoidance of food. When we were growing up, our grandparents didn't say, avoid this, avoid that. When we started eating solid food, we ate what our family ate. Maybe we had Gerbers out of a jar for a little while, but we started eating with the family. In the 1990s, pediatricians made a change to their recommendations without evidence, saying you need to avoid these 9 foods because they're attributed to food allergies. Don't have them until at least age 1. So my 7-year-old son didn't have a chocolate cake until he was 1 year old, because that's when we were allowed to introduce cake and chocolate. So he didn't have eggs before he was 1 year old. That's been proven to cause food allergies. If you don't stimulate the immune response, you recognize any antigen and you react. Food is exactly the same. Our grandmother said, go outside and get dirty. You'll be healthier. She was right. So avoiding food is now not in the guidelines. Pediatricians know that as soon as the toddler starts eating solid food, they're supposed to eat anything they want, anything they can. The mom's supposed to introduce everything. Only 20% of pediatricians take the time at the 3-month visit and the 6-month visit and the 9-month visit to emphasize this and educate. 90% of the pediatricians surveyed know the guidelines. 20% of them reveal, I take the time to tell the mom it's time to introduce peanuts. So this problem isn't going away anytime soon. And if you get trapped into this food allergy diagnostic odyssey, you're avoiding foods. So if you reacted to something and you don't know what it was, but the allergist says avoid peanut, 7 years later, you've never had peanut again, very good chance you're allergic to peanut now.
Hmm. Gosh, unintended consequences, I guess. Can you talk a
Just
little
like
bit?
COVID,
Follow,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's just like COVID. The cure is worse than the ill.
Can you talk just a little bit about, we have another question that is asking to drill down further on intolerance versus allergy. And I know you touched on it, but can we just get a little further on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, making that differential.
So intolerance is usually associated with the GI. Celiac disease, gluten intolerance, lactose intolerance, it's almost always a GI reaction. A food allergy can cause a fatal reaction. Not all reactions end up in fatality. Every death is tragic. The reason we hear about death from food allergy is because every time it happens, it hits the news. It's about one a month. It's a little bit more than one a month in the United States. About 15 people die annually from a food allergy. Every death is tragic. The tricky part is they died from ingesting a food they knew they were allergic to. It's accidental ingestion. And they didn't get to the emergency room on time. That's almost always the case. Food intolerance doesn't cause the kinds of reactions that end up in death. It doesn't cause the type of reaction that you have to treat with adrenaline to stop or reverse the reaction. Celiac disease does not cause a reaction that can be reversed with epinephrine. Food allergy has a much different immune response. An intolerance is uncomfortable. It's hard to live with. My youngest nephew was diagnosed with celiac disease at age 9, associated with a failure to thrive. He was a little bitty kid. He couldn't eat anything and just wasn't digesting properly. He finally got diagnosed with celiac disease. I don't remember how tall he was. He's a little bitty kid. I'm short. I don't weigh a lot, but he's now 5'7", 180 pounds, not 180, 160 pounds. He's no problem now, but he knows he has to avoid gluten. Far different from a wheat allergy. I don't know if that was enough detail or too much detail.
No, that was very helpful for me, and I'm sure to the listeners as well. Here's a doozy of one that I don't know if you'll want to get into or not. A question about the hype over GMO versus non-GMO, and if that's had any impact on the increase or the perceived increase of food allergy. I don't know if you want to get into that topic, but it is an interesting question.
Study it. Yeah, I could study it further, but I would assert that there's no impact on food allergy with any genetically modified food that would not have caused or had any correlation with food allergy. These are all natural products. Kids react to, interestingly, a kid on a dairy farm who drinks unpasteurized milk never develops a milk allergy. So pasteurization may have some effect. When you denature the protein, it changes the reaction. So some kids can drink a glass of milk and they don't respond, but they are allergic to baked milk, and the other way around. So denaturing the protein changes the reaction. We believe that there is application for our technology, not these blood tests, not the diagnostic blood tests in the clinic, but we use what's called epitope mapping. So we identify the amino acid chain that causes the immune response. Could a food manufacturer produce a product that doesn't have that amino acid? Yes. Absolutely. It would be a hypoallergenic food because we know what the 15 amino acids are that cause the reaction. Therapeutically, could a company produce a food product that has therapeutic value? 100%. Because we know the amino acid that has to be modulated. So we give you the target, you develop the cure, and put it in Ensure or put it in.
That is fascinating and exciting.
We know that can happen.
Wow.
The USDA
that's huge. That would be incredible to approach it from almost a nutraceutical perspective and to give the tools to the food companies that they need which kind of leads me to another topic that we briefly discussed, but labeling and what the onus is on the food companies for keeping people safe, or what maybe it's a perceived liability. I know that it's not mandated in the US, right, in terms of declaring allergens or made in a nut-free facility. I mean, is that all based on the company's own liability threshold?
Well, the environment's changing as well. There's an organization called FAIR, Food Allergy Research and Education. They have a significant lobbying effort to get Congress to mandate labeling, particularly around sesame. So for the most part, generally speaking, if a label says natural flavoring, if it's a solid product, it's almost always sesame. Sesame allergies have increased pretty dramatically. It's a small number. There's 1 million Americans allergic to sesame, but it causes a food allergic response. So sesame has gotten a lot of press. FAIR is lobbying hard to get sesame mandated labeling. The problem with not understanding sensitivity creates a huge conundrum for labeling. So let's go back to peanuts. 50% of the population can tolerate more than 1/2 of a peanut without having an allergic reaction. 50% of the allergic population can have more than 1/2 a peanut before they respond. Meaning 50% of the patients are pretty sensitive to peanut. They need to know if it's got more than a certain level. But the other half of the population can eat more than 1/2 peanut. Some can eat 3 peanuts. Some can eat a handful of peanuts before they react. If I knew my sensitivity for milk, I could look at a milk product to say, I can buy this pancake mix because there's only so much protein, milk protein in this pancake mix. And I know I can tolerate more than that. But without knowing the sensitivity, what's the food manufacturer supposed to do? What's happened is that you have to declare anything. You have to declare any level, which is very hard, and it's also not necessary. Not to mention, half the people looking at these labels may not even have a food allergy.
Right. And is that different country to country, the labeling? Is it
Yes,
mandated differently in the EU versus the US?
I believe in the EU it has much more regulations and much more mandates around labeling. They also have been much more litigious around deaths associated with produced food in restaurants.
Wow. Seems like an American thing.
It's true, it does. I haven't seen that happen here. I haven't seen that happen in the US.
And are there any competitors out there to what you're doing? I mean, there's no European country that has access to this sensitivity threshold information, right? Like, it's not out there other than what you're doing. Is that correct?
That's correct. The oral food challenge can give the clinical information, but there's not another blood test in development that can do that. And we have the IP around the combination of peptides that we've identified. Nobody else can use those same peptides. Somebody else might be able to do epitope mapping on a blood sample, but they won't get the precision we get because they don't have the right peptides and they can't use those peptides. We have IP protection around that. We also have the trade secrets, the scientific know-how that's not patentable. So we will wait a long time before we partner with a lab or license the technology to a lab. I told you that Thermo Fisher or Fadia couldn't figure out how to identify peptides on their instrument. We did. We're not going to tell Thermo how we did it.
Right. I wouldn't. So just to wrap up, I mean, this has been an incredibly informative hour. And I think for a lot of people, an eye-opener, especially for me, in terms of how far we haven't come in addressing this issue and how we may be on the cusp of moving forward. So I think just to wrap up, I'd love to ask you, I mean, what are maybe the top 2 outcomes that you see in terms of quality of life for the patient and also just sort of the boon for the industry?
Well, quality of life for the patient, I like to talk about bee stings. Nobody wants to get stung by a bee. I guarantee you, nobody wants to get stung by a bee, but some people are allergic to bee stings. They can't get stung by a bee. So imagine you're allergic to bee stings, and then there's always a bee hovering around your head. Always. Mm-hmm. You can't get stung by that bee. You have to have your epinephrine right here because that bee might sting you, and you never provoke that bee. That's what it's like to live with a food allergy. You have to worry every time you put something in your mouth, and you have an EpiPen with you everywhere you go because you have no idea if the waiter was right when he said it's not prepared with egg. You have no idea if the waiter's right. You have to trust. So that bee is sitting right there. I wonder if that waiter's right. I wonder if that waiter's right. So going to the grocery store and looking at the pancake mix, I have to understand how many times they can say milk on the pancake mix before I'm going to go home and make waffles for my daughter or pancakes for my daughter. Does this have milk in it or not? That bee is right there. So the impact on the quality of life is hard to measure. The anxiety associated with that is measured. The mental health burden on moms and kids has been measured in the payer community. We know it's expensive to deal with the anxiety. There's an emergency room visit every 2.5 minutes in the United States because of a reaction to food. Is that because they didn't know their sensitivity? Is that because they didn't believe the diagnosis? Because the allergist really looked like they were guessing? So we tried the milk, or we went to the Thai food restaurant and we tried it. Maybe I went to college and I never had a food challenge, but I decided to have a piece of pizza. So there's lots of area for improvement around living with food allergies.
I think the bee analogy is so very good.
Well, that's what it's like. That's how. And listen, if I'm a dad, if my kid had a food allergy, I'm staring across the table watching that bee right next to my son's head.
Yeah.
I'm as stressed out as he is.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful illustration. And then just finally, what you see is the biggest impact on the market from a financial perspective and just being a game changer and a disruptor, as you say.
Well, the food allergy is not going to go away. We live so clean that there's going to be avoidance of foods. There's going to continue to be food allergies. So there has to be precision diagnostics, and there will be a need to label. There needs to be a cooperation between the consumer and the food industry to understand how to label and what to label. And this precision diagnostic is going to enable that conversation. The impact should be vast on the ag and the food industry in terms of the amount of growth already projected for food allergy friendly foods. The compounded annual growth rate is over 20% looking at food allergy friendly foods. So if that doesn't have to be a spend focus on that, what else could you spend that money on? Parent and food manufacturer.
Yeah.
So I think there's tremendous financial impacts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. We will get the video up on globalaginvesting.com as soon as we can. And that presentation that Jim gave earlier will be available for download. So we thank you all for joining us. Stay safe and healthy out there. And I hope you can all enjoy some hypoallergenic food in the future. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Kate.